Suddenly there's like a new genre of game. It's all to do with buttons.
What would you say is the most rewarding part of doing all of this for yourself?
I actually thought about this quite a bit. And you can fire in with the main team if you want.
What do you think set indie games apart from AAA titles?
I think the term AAA and indie games like is becoming closer and closer. Like the more time that goes on, so it's going to be a bit harder to kind of define that soon. But at the moment, to me, AAA is sort of essentially a AAA game is when it offers such a large experience and like the amount of content, hopefully at a higher quality, that indie can't really provide. But the indie game development is more of like focusing on one or a very limited budget of features, essentially, that are far more unique and heartfelt, if you want to say. Like you can feel every little bit of development that's went into it, rather than just being a larger aspect game.
Why do you think that is?
Budget, time. Yeah, just you need when you're making an indie game, you have to think about scope a lot, and you can't overdo it. Yeah. And if you do, it'll just take forever. Especially if you're doing solo development. If you're, the tricky thing now is that an indie developer can be technically hundreds of people.
Yes.
Which is kind of where it gets a bit hazy.
Yes.
So
everybody kind of pictures indie development as just one person, but really it's just, it's an independent studio essentially.
Exactly. And an independent studio could, in theory, have a very large budget and a very large team. So kind of if you're a solo developer though, you'll see the difference. Like you will focus more on one aspect or a limited aspect, and it'll be like incredibly colorful or simple kind of thing.
Why do you think that whenever you're looking at an indie project, you might find something that's a little bit unique versus a AAA title where you're going to find something that's maybe more of an in-depth experience, but maybe not have that unique factor to it? What makes it that in the indie game development world you tend to see these kind of unique games?
I think it's mostly because in AAA, because it's a higher budget, so you're paying more for the game as well.
Right.
The player almost expects more for their money. So it's almost like higher quantity over quality sometimes. That's the major focus. Whereas with an indie game developer, you need to stand out. It's not you're technically untrusted, so you need to come up with a really unique proposition of why you should buy my game, kind of thing.
Right.
That's usually why it's like focused on one thing, and it just has to look and feel really, really good.
Yes. Yes, that makes a lot of sense. I've noticed that a lot of the time, whenever I look at an indie game that has been very successful, they really hyper focus on one aspect of the game that makes it extremely fun. A lot of the time, it has to do with the input, or I like to say like the input loop. To make that little loop of you interacting with the game like extremely interactive and fun.
Yeah, and that's that. To be fair, that's not to say that the AAA shouldn't do that. It's just they have a wee bit more leeway when it comes to like the amount of content that they can produce.
Yeah, but I think that it's a little bit more forgiving for them in a way because of the budget that they have. Instead of maybe focusing on delivering an extremely good experience on that aspect, they can just say, okay, well, let's develop a huge world for the player to explore into.
Exactly.
And that's where their fun is going to be. It's going to be in that huge creative world. So less thought is put into creating things that are unique and things that stands out maybe a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely.
Plus, there's a risk too.
Yeah, higher budget comes with you need to have a higher reward. So
yeah,
but also on the other hand, most indies are essentially funding themselves. So if they don't get the game right, that might be the end of it. So
yeah, that all depend on your business savviness, I guess.
Yeah.
If you put too much on the line without anything to back it up, it could be tricky. But whenever you're doing like a AAA game, I would imagine anyways that for them it's a lot more. If you're gonna put out something to the market, a little bit like a Hollywood movie, you're gonna put out something that you kind of know that works. That like a certain type of race game works or a certain type of RPG game work. They already have an audience built up. They're gonna make a game that they know once they put it to market, they're at least gonna sell.
Yeah.
But if they were to decide to make a completely new type of racing rogue like RPG game, something really really strange and out of the box. You don't know if there's a market. So if you're AAA mark and you have a
Yeah.
huge studio, a bunch of employees, you try to do something experimental and it doesn't catch on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I do. It's not technically part of your question, right? But there is one really cool example of this with Obsidian, I think they're called. I think they're owned by Microsoft now.
Yeah.
But they're a AAA developer, right?
Okay.
But they made a little team, like an internal team, that went off and made what is it called? Grounded, I think it's called.
Okay.
It's like this really small indie size game, and it was made by like 10 people or something, like internally.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. It's good. We experiment.
Yeah, that's actually a good way to do it.
Yeah, it's cool.
Gets you to explore a little bit, and then you find something that works, and then you kind of
Yeah,
move on.
and then you can fire in with the main team if you want later on. Why not?
Yep, this didn't work because of you guys. Yeah. So, what inspired you to become an indie game developer, and how did you kind of get started in the field?
Yeah. So like when I was really young, I basically played video games with my dad every day. And one of our favorite games was the original Halo.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, absolutely loved it. And ever since then, I've had this like passion and love for the industry just to get into it. And I went to uni, did my animation degree. I ended up falling into as an animator. I just fell into the role.
Right.
For years. Did that part, and then recently, through my animation, I used a lot of Unreal. Got really comfortable with it, and yeah, I just took the leap. I learned blueprints, did some little tests, and yeah, just went for it.
Nice.
Basically, yeah.
I was actually just noticing, looking at some of your video. To me, the animation of your game stood out to me.
Oh,
so it makes sense that you're an animator now.
Yeah.
I was meaning to ask you, like, is it just using Unreal that makes these animation makes it really easy, or is it is there more to it?
No, I'm sure this will be covered in like another question or whatever. Yeah. But basically, like, I don't know what, there was a video that I watched somewhere, but basically it was that you should focus on what you're good at, and learn small things at what you're not, just slowly, you know. Yes. So blueprints, I think I learned pretty quick in comparison, but like I knew I was very good at making things look and feel good and run well,
right?
Because that was kind of part of my job. So I just go ham.
Yeah, I can really
I just
tell.
go for it, you know.
Yeah, and I think that's it's a really good strategy for you. It kind of falls into what we were just talking about just a while ago. Whenever you're doing an indie game, you kind of want to hone in on like you just said to what you're really good at and make it stand out.
Yeah,
and I find it stood out to me. So
no,
I was just looking at the video to learn about your game, and I was like, wow, these animations they're pretty solid.
Oh, thanks. I think as well, just again, you don't have to put it in thing, but I think another thing that's important as well is like to be honest with yourself and the players or the audience, because at the end of the day, like if you're good at, let's say, animation, it's fantastic, it might look really good, but again, just be honest about those baby steps of like what you need to learn and develop on, and that might be through the process of making this game, or it might be every game. Like it might be like one game is very good at this thing, and then the next game, it just gets better and better and better. So
yeah, I definitely agree with Baby Step.
Yeah.
You ever watch What About Bob?
No.
No, it's an old movie.
All right.
Yeah, there's like a running joke inside of it about baby steps.
Oh, right.
If you've heard about it, but I definitely agree with just taking baby steps and just kind of taking your time with it and just doing a little bit more every day.
Yeah. And also reach out for help, like just, and also reach out for help, like an advice. Yeah, why not?
Absolutely. Definitely. You want to be open and have as much networking as possible, really, especially if you're solo. Having a community, doing everything by yourself is practically impossible if you really want to. No, it depends what you're trying to do there, but it's pretty challenging.
Yeah. Stuff.
Yeah. So you're mentioning you use Unreal Engine. You mentioned Blueprint. Can you tell me a little bit about the tools that you're using to develop your games, and which one would you recommend for somebody that's just kind of starting out?
Yeah. So I've got more of a 3D background, so I primarily use Maya 3D for my animation modeling, character animation, and all that sort of stuff. And then for my game side of things, I use Unreal. At the moment, I'm using Unreal 4. I haven't moved up to Unreal 5 yet, but maybe the next project, we'll see.
Yes.
For texturing and UI sort of stuff, I actually use the Affinity suite.
Which one?
Affinity. It's actually quite good. Basically, it's a cheaper version of the Adobe suite. Okay. But for like a fraction of the price, but it does the exact same thing. It's pretty good. Okay. And then I spend a lot of my time in Trello as well. Like I organize everything through a Trello board. It's
the last person I spoke to also used Trello for organizing.
Incredible. Yes. Absolutely. It's honestly best one of the best apps I've ever used,
Is that right?
But the one thing I actually recommend the one app I actually really recommend using, right, is it's one of them, right? I'll see if I can get the name of this. It's the weirdest name, right? It's called YED Graph Editor, I think.
Is that
something like this, right?
Is that still like
weird
line charts?
Yeah, it's like making custom diagrams and stuff.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, I've actually looked them up for my business.
Have you? Oh, right.
For like
it's free
procedures for repairs or troubleshooting steps.
Yeah, right. Now it might sound really weird, right? And this won't be for everybody. Fair enough, right? But if you're doing anything with UI, right, you'll know how complicated it can be to get the inputs right and like the sort of threads and stuff, right? If you use the graph editor though, just for a visual reference,
yeah.
Oh, amazing! Like I use this thing for everything, like to see how enemies will interact with your player character and like all my UI, like to see how everything is connected. Absolutely amazing. Like saves me hours.
So just to make sure I understand properly, like this application or software, essentially, if I pick up the right one, you can have like a block and you can make some line charts to say like this would interact with this and like an interaction tree.
Yeah, kinda. It's like a behavior tree type idea. And you can just make custom links. So you say for example, you have main menu and then what UI pops up. And then if you click on that, what does the next thing? And then, if you click on that, what does, whatever's connected.
That's a pretty good idea.
Yeah, like when I'm making the UI in Unreal, it's very linear. And you don't know where things are connected exactly all the time. Whereas like with the graph editor, like with this app, it's honestly like the best thing to keep track of your UI. That's
awesome. That's a good tip.
Yeah, really good.
I might take that one for myself, actually.
Yeah. It doesn't look very nice though. It's like very old looking, but it's really good.
So can you talk to us a little bit about your creative process whenever that you want to start a game? So right now you're working on Button Pop, right? So talk to us a little bit about that creative process of kind of getting starting and how does it reach the finish line?
Yeah, so basically at the very beginning of everything, before you get into the game engine or code or programming, anything like that, I sit down and I write down ideas of core game mechanics. I don't even think about visuals. I just mechanics. And that would be like things that I find fun personally. And I think that other people would find fun as well. After that, I kind of remove anything that's not user friendly or like easy to understand. And I try and pair that with a very unique visual style. And that could be like character colors, environments, anything. Okay. But the point of this visual style is to sort of solidify the genre. Like you're supposed to convey essentially what this game is, even without sound or any text. You just know what's going on essentially.
Right.
Just quick. Like you can do this over like a day or two or something.
Yeah. Like you say, I think like a picture says 1,000 words.
Yeah, exactly. Like part of my animation training was that you were supposed to animate stuff without sound.
Okay.
So that you can actually understand what's happening, even like just as a picture. Like you don't even need any additional stuff. But after that, I sort of create a base scene where it's just a level, blocks, grey, everything's just grey box and stuff like that. Where we start to iterate on the flow and the gameplay mechanics to the point where I'm happy with it. Anybody that else plays it, like play test it a little bit, is happy with it. Mm-hmm. And that's when you start to really iterate on your art style, like what makes it pop, what makes it like pleasing to look at, what makes it easy to look at as well. It is very important to get your art style correct because that's that's the first impression, and it's also the first thing to put people off.
Yeah.
So you need to get that. But yeah, after that point, you want to really focus on the base values of the game. So you need to have, like for Button Pop, for example, for the game just to work, like nothing extra. I would need one level. It needs to have the damage system. Damage, enemy damage button type idea. You need your button in there, the button press, and at least one enemy. If you set all that up and you can start to balance things, after that point, that's when you can start to add more enemies, more types of damage, more buttons, more levels, that kind of thing. And then after that point, it's pretty much just making sure that level is beautiful. Like for me, you make sure that you have one level that is finished. So that going forward, everything else falls into place. Like you always have a level to reference so that, everything has a standard essentially.
Yes.
Yeah. So you can tick off essentially. And after that,
it's a very good way to scale your project.
Exactly. Like as long as you create a base of operation essentially, so that everything else can have a reference, and you can kind of always go back to and say, we're changing the art style a little bit, and then that affects everything else. That's how I work. And yeah, after that, it's pretty much just adding more features, adding more elements. You iterate as much as possible, and it's gonna sound really weird, but at any point in this, just don't be I'm almost like trying to tell myself this all the time.
Yes.
Don't be afraid to remove things.
Yes.
Yes. If you get to the end of it and you're like, that enemy doesn't work, that's fine. Delete.
Yes.
Like it's fine. Okay. And that's pretty much it. Obviously, all the way through this, you got a playtest. But yeah, just listen to the feedback.
Lots of playtests, eh? I can't tell you
every
how
day,
many,
every week.
Yes, yeah. How many playtesting I've done for my small projects, and
yeah,
everything.
Oh yeah, if I meant to say as well, like if obviously I was asking you if you want to playtest Button Pop, but if you'd like me to playtest your stuff, I'd be up for that. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I'll send you a link there for some of what we worked on
now. Go.
So for now, for us, we're just doing we're essentially trying to do mini game projects to kind of get us used to starting a project, and it's kind of scoping essentially. Start a project, get all the features that we want about it, that we talked about it, into it as much as possible, and finish the project. So a lot of the time, I find what's difficult whenever you're starting out things like this, especially if you're doing this on your own, you're gonna overscope way too big. Even if you don't think you're overscoping, you're overscoping. The last game we started to do, we've stripped down everything, and we're like, there's this. Okay, this is small, easy, manageable, and we should be able to do this in 3 months. Now we're 4 months down the line, and it's like, okay, well, we're gonna take out that feature and take off this feature and take off this feature, and what you can do too is like a game jam would be kind of a good way to teach you how to scope. You say, okay, well, I want to do all of these things, and so let's start, and the next thing you know, you're going to start to realize really quickly.
That is actually something probably should have mentioned it there, but basically, see when you're doing these base values, like you're setting up the game, the base of it, it should always be broad strokes to begin with. Just, say for example, the damage system, it should be, you just say general damage or general health or whatever. Yes. But as you add to that, it could be fire damage or explosion damage or shrapnel. It's
that's right. You refine it as you go. Make sure that you got a little core loop to start with.
Exactly.
But it's kind of like a prototype.
Exactly. But that base or broad stroke that you're doing should be extremely quick. You're talking weeks, max, and the purpose of that is it could look terrible, right?
Yeah.
But the point of that is that you play the game and you'll feel you can feel it out, and you'll know what works and what doesn't work, and you will know if the game as a whole works or doesn't work, and is it worth it? It's so
it's like some say, fail fast.
Exactly. That's exactly And failure's fine, man. Failure's absolutely fine as long as you learn from it. That's the main thing,
That's it. There's nothing wrong with failing. It really isn't, as long as you learn from it. It's really upwards. The only way to grow. So
fail upwards,
What's that?
You got to fail upwards.
Yeah, fail upwards. So what's the biggest consideration that you keep in mind whenever you're creating a new game? I feel like we might have just kind of touched upon that a little bit with what we were just talking about, but is there anything else that you'd like to mention?
I actually thought about this quite a bit. And I mean, aside from creating, your main gameplay loop and making sure it's fun and engaging, I actually think for developers, especially smaller teams,
Mm-hmm.
you from day one have to think about, can you produce this content that you've got consistently over the entire project.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of time, like for me personally, like I might be able to make, let's say, a very high quality character,
Mm-hmm.
very good quality animations for it, but could I produce that same level of quality over 50 characters?
Yes, which
Like
kind
that's a
of
lot,
goes into that
you know?
whole scoping skill, which I think is probably one of the biggest thing I found personally whenever I started, and I'm still learning.
Yeah,
And
it is like this isn't me saying like I just know it or whatever. Now it's a very tough thing to like even accept. Like if you're sitting there
yes,
going, oh yeah, I've made this amazing looking thing, it's great.
yeah.
But there is a reason why a lot of indie developers don't do photorealistic
Yes,
stuff, because it's just takes so much time.
yes,
Like you
you'll
just
never
can't.
finish.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
which kind of comes back to what we're saying, where since you can't kind of go for these extremely photorealistic graphics or things like that, that could be just attracting just because of how nice it looks. You kind of have to find another way to attract your gamers.
yeah,
Which is where you tend to have to find like unique quirks that kind of stand out in a different way.
exactly, exactly. Yeah.
And you've mentioned to me that you've been doing a little small project over time. You started your first official project right now that you're working on, Button Pop. Now, over all this time, has your game design, the way that you do this, has this changed since when you started to kind of how you're doing it now?
Yeah.
Any kind of
Uh,
lesson learns along the way?
Yeah, I mean, before getting into this, I knew that the marketing side of things would be a very, a very important part of the process.
Yes.
But a whole other level than what I thought it was going to be. Just anybody listening, it is at least 50-50, if not more, time like you will be spending on marketing. I think like in my week, I spend at least 2 to 3 days just on social media posts, editing, recording, wherever it may be. Like it's a lot of time. So that was a bit of a wake up call, I suppose. But just on the side of like game dev wise, specifically in Unreal, I've slowly but surely learned the process of interfaces, and they are like, oh my god, game changer.
Is that right?
Absolute game changer. Yeah, you can, instead of it being a linear process of casting to each individual character or object, you can use a sort of folder of events to cast to all actors in your entire game if you like,
Okay.
and it's more efficient. So that's one thing I've picked up.
So if
Been
you're
really good.
using Unreal Engine, be work while looking into interfaces.
Oh yeah, oh
And
yeah,
I have to agree with you with the marketing side of things. Is it's a really big thing if you're going to be a solo developer. And I
yeah,
really relate with what you're saying. That the
yeah,
whole aspect of doing your own marketing, trying to grow your own fan base is something that you gotta like doing because you're going to be doing a lot.
yeah. It's good fun. It's just
Yes.
it's just a lot of time.
It's a
That's
lot
all.
of time.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
How do you
yeah.
feel? It's not really in the question there, but just since you brought that up, how do you feel about having a publisher versus kind of self promoting? Do you have
Tough,
any opinion on that?
tough. Tough, because essentially, I think it really just comes down to your situation, like your personal situation. Like if you have the money, like, or maybe you're doing this part time or as a hobby kind of thing.
Right.
I don't think you need a publisher personally. Like
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think it works anymore. Like publishers again, this is something that's developed over years.
Yes.
Publishers used to be much more important because they would be the ones to print your game on disc and advertise it on TV or whatever it might be, and create all these advertisement assets. But nowadays, most people download their games.
Yes.
Most people get their game news through social media and websites, which all of which you can kind of do. So,
Mm-hmm.
if anything, I would maybe say it might be worth having like a community manager or like a social media manager
Mm-hmm.
on your team rather than getting a publisher involved. But I honestly, I think it depends on the scale as well of your project.
Certainly.
That's the other thing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a very fair opinion. It's kind of where I stand on it as well.
Yeah.
What would you say is the most common challenge that you encounter whenever you're developing games, and how do you usually overcome
Mm. This might sound kind of weird,
it?
but the biggest challenge for me is actually finding or creating a split between your game development process and your marketing or community development kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It is very difficult. Like you kind of go, for me, I kind of go back and forth on feelings sometimes. So, some weeks I'll be like, I'm getting a lot of game dev stuff done, which is great. The game's looking cool, but then I feel like no one knows about it,
Yes.
basically. But then on the other hand, if you do a lot of focus on the marketing side of things or, community engagement, suddenly you're like, the game's the exact same as last week.
Yes.
So it's a bit tough. And honestly, I think the solution is just trying to find a balance. That's kind of it. And then on top of that, it's finding a work-life balance for me.
Yes.
Like I think me, much like a lot of other indie devs, like we work too hard sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So it is just finding that time to switch off and not work.
Yes.
Essentially. Other than that, that's the main challenges for me.
Yeah. No, that's pretty fair. It kind of comes with the fact that a lot of indie developers are just wearing a lot of hats.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Especially if you're a solo developer.
Yeah. Whenever you're doing indie dev or just starting any kind of business, and a lot of the time, if you don't have a team that you can hire, you're gonna have to be that whole team. I've experienced it with any dev. I've experienced it with my business when I first started, like 7 years ago, and it's heavy and it's a lot of balancing, and you really have to get that balancing. But eventually, one of the best advice that was given to me back then was delegate. Don't try to do everything yourself. It's fine at first. You don't have the budget. You're alone. Do it by yourself. Do what you can. But as soon as possible, delegate.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
because that's something that's hard to kind of keep doing for, let's say, the rest of your life, right?
Yeah,
to always be pushing and pushing and pushing like that is fine in the first couple of years, but eventually that workload needs to ease off, and you need to focus on what you're really good on, right? So you can be working on marketing, but maybe you're an awesome animator, and instead of putting your time in animating, you're putting your time in marketing, when somebody else that maybe an awesome marketer could go ahead and do that,
Yeah. And at the end of the day, that gives that other person a job as well. Makes their life better, so it works for everybody,
That's right. And what would you say is the most rewarding part of doing all of this for yourself?
I would say I would say that since, as I was saying before, like I've been wanting to do game development since I was tiny. Like it's having that feeling of being able to do something in life that you love, you really believe in, like day in, day out, and like actually seeing the excitement that you have reflected on other people, like the players and your audience. It really, honestly, that like really gives you a sense of purpose. Like it's amazing.
I find it's really fun to see your somebody play your game and get excited for a minute there, to get tense in a tense situation, and I was like, oh yes, like they're feeling
like
they're feeling it.
Yeah, I think like you would agree as well, but it's like you feel very lucky, to be in that sort of position. So I'd say that.
That's awesome. And can you share a little bit of advice? We touched base a little bit on it already there, but on staying motivated whenever we're working on these kind of projects. They're usually long terms. You're gonna find some challenges along the way. How do you stay motivated through all of it?
I kind of do three things. There's the main thing is that whenever you're kind of looking up at the hill, of like all the work you have to do, and it seems like you're never going to get out of that tunnel kind of thing. Like as soon as you like break it down into chunks, it becomes a wee bit easier. And like what's also really important is that when you complete one of those little chunks, keep a list of it. Like put it on a list, like keep it somewhere, so that when the next time you come up against like the next challenge, you're like, it's really overwhelming. You can look back and see this entire list of all these little things you've just achieved. It just keeps you just a bit motivated. And that could be like big or small things. You could break those chunks into tiny little bits, or type like maybe like subjects or something like that. The other thing is that for me, again, this might depend on developer. I believe in making games that you personally find fun. Like it would be very odd for me to make a game that I don't enjoy. personally. So that on its own would kind of make it a bit easier when things are a bit difficult. You kind of know that you're making an element that you're going to enjoy really, really soon. So that kind of helps. And also, like this is such a weird one, right? But whenever I'm stuck on something,
Mm-hmm.
like ever, if I just stop, like go outside, touch some grass for once, right? Right? Like I don't know, like start fresh, just get some sleep or whatever, right? And I come back to my desk, suddenly,
Go touch
like
the stone wall of one of your castle in Scotland.
castle, we just whatever, right? Like whenever I come back, right? It's so weird. Like the issue that I would have spent hours trying to fix, suddenly I just have the answer.
Yeah,
It's weird.
sometimes you really have to just take that step away. You're just way too involved, and you'll spend like 2 3 hours, like you just said, on that one thing, and you're just burnt out on it. You can't find a solution. You step away, come back the next day, and it's like, oh, done.
Yeah, that was easy. Took you like 5 minutes. It's like, yeah,
yeah, that's good advice. Not to stay stuck on something too long. If you're stuck, just kind of take a minute, take a day, take some time. Maybe even just start working on something completely different. If you want to keep working on your project, just put that aside, go work on something different, and then come back to it later.
Absolutely. Actually, there's one thing that I learned from some developer diary from one of the big games, like one of the Halo games or something.
Okay.
That I took away. That helps a lot actually. Is that if you've got your schedule of like how much work you do a week or something, and then randomly, if you do what's called a sprint, I don't know if you've heard of this, but basically, if you do a sprint, basically it means that you will do more work within a shorter period of time, just for like 1 week or something. So you say the sprint's going to take over a week, and you try to get as much done as possible. And the point of it is that you kind of break up the cycle a bit, and you see how you kind of challenge yourself. Essentially, it's like it's almost like the same as a game jam, I guess. So yeah, you just kind of break up your cycle, and it helps a lot. Like you're like, oh, you can get a lot done. So
it kind of jolts you awake in your own projects.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool. And finally, can you talk to me a little bit about your upcoming project? So you're working on a game called, I believe it's a Button Pop, which is a tower defense with buttons, which is pretty interesting. With buttons, button mashing. I'm curious. I have to ask you, why buttons? How did you come up with the idea? What inspired you to make a game like that?
It's going to sound really funny, right? Yeah. So how when I was talking about like focusing on what you're really good at and not overdoing things.
Yes.
I was sitting down at one point and I was like, what is the simplest thing I could make? Right. And I came up with, or what's the simplest thing I could animate, essentially. I was like, I could do a button. Just goes in and out. That's it. It's cool. I was like, what happens if the buttons are attacking that? And so I just kind of started to come up with that. And yeah, that was the reason.
That's awesome. It's kind of funny because one of the last project that we were working on, we're a team of we're 3 that works on them, and we were talking, and I'm kind of leading the projects, and I said for this project we were talking about scope, and I said I want to scale this down as simple as possible, and I said how can we make just kind of pressing a button as fun as possible. And that's just kind of like the whole idea of the game that we kind of got started. It kind of morphed into something else, but that's kind of how it started. And I thought it was interesting to see your game about Button Pop. I was like, oh, he thought the same thing that I did.
Suddenly there's like a new genre of game. It's all to do with buttons.
Just buttons everywhere.
Yeah.
And what can you tell us about your game? So it's a tower defense.
Tower defense. It's a mashup between a tower defense, idle, and a button masher game, where you are essentially a giant button, and it has to defend itself against all the other little jealous buttons coming to get you. To defend yourself, you build turrets and upgrade them, and you can earn coins or money through pressing your button, and you earn streaks via the more you press it. But obviously the enemies want to interrupt you as much as possible, so you need to kind of deal with them. Soon I'll be adding in more bosses to the game, so that'll be something that's coming up fairly soon, that are looking kind of interesting.
Awesome.
Trying to be vague about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's looking cool.
Awesome. When do you think, do you have a release date or a release kind of goal that you have in mind for now, or?
I Yeah, I really want it out this year, and within the next couple of months, definitely. But I've kind of told myself that I will make the release date when the game's basically done. I think it's only fair, for everybody to kind of know when the game's coming out, when it's actually basically went gold.
Right.
So I think that's a fairer kind of way of doing it.
Yeah. It can be hard to predict the future and how long these kind of projects can take. So if you go ahead and the release date's going to be right there, and you're going to put a lot of work on your
Pressure.
plate there if ever,
Yeah.
if you can't
Yeah.
quite meet that goal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is this your first commercial release?
My own, from like my own projects, yes. But again, from freelancing and my work, there's quite a lot. To be fair.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not just video games, but also like animations stuff.
Yeah. What kind of other things do you typically animate?
My focus was actually character animation. But my work prior to leaving, I was part of a small studio that worked mostly within the industrial sector. So like big companies like BP and Shell and all that sort of stuff.
Okay.
And yeah, my focus was more character animation, but since it was a small studio, you kind of have to learn a bit of everything. You have to wear a lot of hats, as you say. So the entire VFX pipeline was essentially on my belt by the end of me leaving.
Okay.
So yes, good amount.
Yeah, well, it's nice that you have a lot of experience to bring to the game, which I think it shows. Whenever I was just looking at it, it popped out to me. No pun
Pops.
intended. Yeah, the button popped to me. So, yeah, I noticed it right away. So that's really awesome. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention in closing, either about your game or about any of the subject that we touched upon today?
I don't think so. Yeah, I just think that developers, you can kind of just, you don't have to be hard on yourself. Take your time and playtest, playtest, playtest.
Yes. Well, like you mentioned,
You know?
it's a good if you're making a game that you're gonna enjoy because you're gonna be playtesting it a lot.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely.
Like a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
You're gonna know your game by heart.
Yeah. You're basically a cheat code.
You're the cheat code.
You're the cheat code.
That's great. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Mark. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it was great being on. Yeah.
Yeah, it was
Fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Yes, it was a great chat.